Hey guys, Dan and Sally, we are here downtown. We are shooting with the A7RIII, the Canon 5D Mark IV, and the Nikon D850. We're super excited. We are going to test these cameras out against skin tones, all sorts of other stuff too.
Yeah, it should be a lot of fun. Tons of shooting opportunities. We'll take a look at the focus system and just see what these cameras can do, how they perform, gauge some operation things between the three of them. So let's check out some images and see what we can put this together with. So kind of a perfect dynamic range test. We have this overexposed background and then we have her in the shadows right here. So we're gonna kind of expose for the background, bump things up in post and then see how it looks and see especially how those skin tones fall when we start boosting those shadows to trying to get everything at the right exposure. All right, so we're gonna do a quick focus test right here. We've got all three cameras with the 70-200. We're gonna shoot it at 200 and track them as we're moving forward. We're gonna keep these on high speed, continuous. I've got the 3D autofocus turned on right here. We're shooting wide on the Sony and the Canon, and we'll see how this does. All right, so already we just did our first take of her running towards us, and I'd have to say the Nikon probably did the best as far as the buffer not filling up. It shot the most shots continuously. This is even without the grip. We add that grip, we get 9 frames per second on this, and we are not using, we're using a generic SD card on this one. It's a high-speed SD card, but we're just using SD. Now on the Sony and Canon, you filled up a little bit faster on the Sony. We are using a UHS-2 card in that one, so that's kind of the best case scenario. For the Canon,
it did the worst, like by far. By the time it got to the end of her running towards us, he couldn't even play back the images. It was extremely slow.
So on this one, again, we don't have UHS-2, we just have UHS-1, but it is a high-speed Extreme Pro card, and we're shooting just about as good as we can get for an SD card on that one. And I also couldn't play back the images immediately after. We can kind of play back on the Sony, but that's about it. You can't zoom in or anything like that. We do have the most control over the Nikon on what we can do while that buffer is clearing. So really, the biggest issue I've got with Nikon on this camera as far as ergonomics are concerned is actually this focus button. It's right here, and with longer lenses like that, my hand is always here, and to be able to adjust it from single to continuous, I've got to bring it back here, and if you're using especially long lenses, 300 millimeters or more, it's really uncomfortable to have to hold the lens so close to the camera. With the small lenses, it's not that big of a deal, but really, it's just my least favorite thing so far about the ergonomics of this camera.
The one thing with the Sony A7RIII, even though it's small ergonomically, my fingers tend to touch a lot of the buttons that are nearby, even though I don't mean to touch them. It's quite annoying, whereas the Canon, it's a beast. It's large, I don't have to worry about hitting the buttons at any point in time.
So one thing I do want to talk about with this camera is live view. We did use it a little bit. It's nice having the screen. It does flip out. That's something that Canon does not have. However, the autofocus performance in live view is just not up to what the other cameras are delivering. And so when we did use it, you know, it's okay for point to point. It doesn't track very well. So it's something that you just are not going to be able to use as a daily driver. We do have that electronic shutter though. So if you want to be able to shoot silently, you can. I just really wish that they up their game in live view autofocus to something like what Canon and Sony are being able to do with that.
focus on Hannah's eye here. And as you can see, I'm trying to shoot through the flowers. It is not catching her eye. It will focus on her eye, and then once I take the picture, it goes completely out of focus. I don't know why. The Canon did not have a problem with this. Neither the Nikon had a problem with this.
All right, so we just finished up shooting right here. It was an awesome time. All three cameras performed very well, but there was a couple things that stuck out to us. So again, we're gonna head back to the studio and give you kind of the full results, but we just wanted to say a couple things that kind of stuck out to us a little bit while we were shooting.
Yeah, I would have to say that the eye autofocus system on the Sony, it was messing up a few times for me. I was trying to focus on her face and it kept catching the flowers in front of her face. I had to turn it off before anything was able to focus. As well, another thing I do have to say, I do like the Sony coloring. It did win out for me. I went back, I edited some of my pictures from yesterday, and I do have to say that the Canon was a little bit flat, whereas the Sony brought in some pretty beautiful dynamic range and some more contrast, and I like the skin tones a lot.
To add to that, something that I definitely noticed was that it depends on what the kind of colors are in the field that you're shooting. So yes, they kind of go towards one or the other, but if you have a lot of reds in the scene, sometimes the Canon can turn out a little too red, and then the Nikon looks better. Another thing we noticed is that the screens are very different. So the Nikon screen is extremely green, and so a lot of times I had a hard time looking at it here. Sony's looked pretty good, Canon's looked just a little bit worse. I think Sony's kind of color on the screen looked one of the best. But we got into post, sometimes we were seeing results that looked identical across all cameras. Sometimes we were seeing the shifts, so it really just depends on how you're shooting. Something else I want to talk about is we shot a lot of movement and high speed, and we'll talk a little bit about the buffer, but you know, overall the Nikon probably performed the best in that category. Not only did it shoot fastest, especially with the grip on it, can shoot 9 frames per second, but it also had the best buffer, and I'm just using an SD card in this, so this is kind of the worst case scenario for this. So overall, if you're shooting something like sports, this is probably the best bet that you're going to go with.
Yeah, so overall, what's your favorite so far? You have to tell me your favorite so far.
So overall, for photos that we have been shooting, I will say the Nikon probably performed the best. There are other things that we didn't talk about too much, like video. I mean, when it comes down to it, the Sony is going to win on video, pretty much hands down. If you're shooting 1080p, the Canon is great. If you're shooting 4K, this does shoot 4K, but you're going to live without autofocus and live view, which was kind of another deteriorating factor, I guess. You use live view a lot.
I use live view a lot, especially on the Sony because it's so easy. I like my Canon live view, but I prefer to shoot through the viewfinder.
It's nice to be able to see your image as you're shooting it. In the viewfinder, you also get that with live view in the viewfinder on the Sony, and you don't have that with this camera. So, you know, live view performance is okay on autofocus from point to point, but continuous is just about worthless on this, and that's something you also deal with on the video side. So if you're going in video, you might have 4K, but you're gonna lose that. Focus peaking also goes away in 4K. So the Sony, by far, is gonna be the best in video, and then the Canon close behind, as long as you can stick to 1080p. 4K, I think it's kind of useless, but for 1080p video, it's good. So let's head back and we'll see what we got.
Okay, so we're back in our studio and we have had the chance to review all of the things that we shot, and I'm telling you, these three cameras are absolutely amazing. They really have turned out some amazing images for us.
Yeah, it's been great so far. If you like the video, go ahead and hit like and subscribe to us as well. Tons more to come, and you can check out the reviews for all of these cameras individually as well. And then in the links below, not only do we have our kits and stuff like that, but you can also download some of the raw images from this to check them out yourself. So, I mean, all these cameras have been great. There are little things that we like about each one, so we'll kind of talk about that a little bit. I mean, ergonomics and usability, you have any preferences so far?
Ergonomics, man, I shoot weddings primarily, and I'm telling you, I have issues when it comes to heavy cameras. I'm carrying two camera bodies at all times. I have a 7200, a 24-70, and I do typically shoot with my Canon 5D Mark IV. The Nikon D850 is definitely the heaviest. It is a beast of a camera. It's an amazing camera, but it's too heavy for me. I would have to say the Sony A7RIII wins out on this. Even though it's small, it does produce amazing images, but the downgrade to it being small ergonomically is that I do touch some of the buttons that are kind of closer together more often.
Yeah, so it has a lot of customization, which is great to have. Yeah. The downside to that is obviously, you know, if you have to rent a second one of these, it can take forever to set this thing up. It's pretty confusing in the menu system as well. You know, pretty much you can buy a Canon and a Nikon, and you might spend a minute or two kind of setting up some basic things in the menu. You can customize the AF system, and after that, you know, you pretty much take it the way that it is. I mean, the viewfinder, so it's great to have live view inside the viewfinder in some ways, because you're getting a live picture of the image that you're not getting in the other two.
Right. I do have to say as well, I do use live view a lot more now that I have tried out the A7R III. 5D Mark IV is not bad as in usability, but I do prefer the Sony A7R III when it comes to the live viewfinder. I find it just easier to get my image. Oftentimes I'm in a reception, I throw my camera over my head and I'm shooting. It's so nice that there is a flip screen on the Sony A7R III versus the Canon 5D4 and the Nikon D850.
If Nikon had a good live view autofocus system, I think things would be different. You do have that flip touchscreen. It's just not really usable in real life just because it just doesn't track focus very well. Point to point, it's okay at best. Not as good with these longer lenses. And so, you know, for me, that was just one of the big takeaways from this is that when it comes to live view shooting, if that's something you do a lot of or any of, the Nikon is really the weakest of that. And in the day of mirrorless cameras and dual pixel autofocus system and things like that, this is really behind the pack. And it's such a shame because in so many other ways, it's ahead of the game. But when it comes to the regular autofocus system, I think the Nikon is just about as good as it gets. I mean, we have the same autofocus system from the D5. It's amazing. The 3D autofocus does a great job tracking. If you looked at the results from our sports test, this one did the best by far. It was the only one that stuck every image. We did the test twice, and this one stuck every image both times. In both of these cameras, we had it lose autofocus for a second and then it regained it back. So this is the only one that stuck to that object all the time. And then you had some additional issues every so often with the eye autofocus.
I did. The eye autofocus on the A7R III, I was trying to shoot through the flowers and it kept catching the flowers versus her eye. And that was very frustrating because I often have brides will hold up their bouquet to their face and that would be severely annoying. And as well, the buffer filled up so quickly on the 5D4 that, I mean, I put my camera down after she was running towards us and it just took forever for it to get all the images in.
I mean, the eye autofocus is great when you're shooting portraits.
Yeah.
It works so well most of the time, but there are some situations that it's not good for. And so you find yourself turning it off, turning it on, and depending on the situation, it works well. Once you turn it off, it's kind of down to a normal autofocus system with points. Certainly for sports photography, wildlife photography, I think the Nikon system is going to be the best, and then if you're gearing
couples portraits as well. I do have to add that in. I was shooting an engagement session tonight, and I do have to say the eye autofocus on this was impeccable. With couples moving, you know, they're typically like, oh, okay, I want you guys to kiss each other, or I want you guys to walk towards me. It was impeccable in that. So I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying it was faulty with something in front of your face. It gets distracted almost, I would have to say. So when it comes to low light, I would have to say all three are really, really good. I mean, noticeably wise to the naked eye. We zoomed in really, really tight. Honestly, the grain is just the same. So it is nice when it comes to the Nikon D850 and the Sony A7R III that you get high resolution images, and the detail with that, I'm able to add in a little bit of noise reduction to both of these, and they are just impeccable. The quality is still amazing, and it's usable.
Yeah, and because of the more dynamic range that you have in these files, you can lift the shadows a little bit, and you don't see as much of that grain. You see it pop up a little bit quicker in the shadows of the Canon. So, I mean, you're talking maybe a third stop difference between all of them, so it's not this massive difference. But it's nice to know that you can lift the shadows a little bit and see a little bit less grain in the blacks and shadow areas on the Nikon and the Sony. So that's something that they do have. And I did want to mention video real quick, and we didn't really shoot video, but it's something that even photographers have to do at times. And if you need it, 1080p on all three of these cameras looks great. You got plenty of features. The big advantages to these two are going to be of autofocus. That's good when you're doing that. So if you're doing self-shooting like we're doing now, which a lot of you photographers would do, it's nice to have on both of those cameras. And you don't have that on the D850 that's usable. It's something that we do find ourselves shooting. We do it a lot, even as photographers, something you need to do. And Sony definitely wins for that one.
So let's get real, guys. Let's talk about cost. These three cameras stay around $3,000, which is a really, really large investment, even for wedding photographers. I do have to say that for me, the Canon wins out. The Sony, when you invest in this camera, it's not just $3,000. You have to invest in their G Master lenses, which I prefer, and they are amazing. And I do say that they are worth the cost, but they start around $1,500, and that is very cost prohibitive
and
to me.
you don't have any third-party options like Sigma and Tamron. You have to use adapters for those things. Autofocus performance goes down. They're good in a pinch. If you already own their lenses, you can do adapters. And if you already own like Canon glass and you want to switch over slowly, it works. But ideally, you need to be using Sony glass. And it was definitely by far the most expensive. And then also the other weakness with Sony on the lens lineup is that you really don't have much over 200 millimeters. So if you're sports or wildlife photography, you just need more than 200 mil. That's where you might prefer the Canon and Nikon setup. So, I mean, for us, we stay between 24 to 200 millimeters most of the time for our wedding stuff. So that part isn't a big deal, but we were looking at at least $1,000 more, if not more than that, to buy lenses, the lens lineup that we would need for this camera versus Canon or Nikon, which Nikon also has cheaper lenses available. And then also, if you wanted to save more money than that, like I said, you could go with the Sigma 24-70 or Tamron's a great 24-70.
And those are great lenses.
Yeah,
I love
they're
the
good,
Sigma,
and they focus just fine with the Canons. I've never had any issues with those. And I mean, it's something that's very real and something that we struggled with ourselves, because at the end of the day, we're like, we have to buy these cameras ourselves, and so which one do we want to invest in for our business? And so so which one was kind of your favorite to be able to shoot with, and which would you shoot with?
Okay, I have a surprising winner overall, but my favorite to shoot with was definitely the Sony A7R III. It's a fun camera. When it comes down to the things we listed off, the viewfinder for weddings, it's so much easier for me. Ergonomics, it's small, my back's not gonna hurt anymore. I can carry 2 bodies and not feel, like it's overweight or anything like that. And it's an amazing quality camera. I do say that I love the skin tones on it. I know that's an unpopular opinion, but I do tend to edit that way. And I really think it is my winner for usability and overall.
I mean, skin tone, you saw it yourself. The skin tones on the A7R III have gotten much better.
Yes.
It's definitely improved from what they've been doing before. And it really just depends on you and how you edit. If you go a little bit more green and yellow,
Which
I think that you're gonna like the Sony colors and maybe even Nikon colors a little bit more. And if you like kind of that red magenta type look, the Canon pulls it off very nicely. Yeah. So, I mean, overall for me, I would say that as a camera itself, as a photography camera, the Nikon D850 kind of wins overall. Yes. It has everything that your tried and true photographer would need, and it can shoot virtually any environment that you want to go in, and you don't have limitations for sports and wildlife photographers. Yes. It's good for everything. However, I, like many photographers, am finding ourselves in a little bit more hybrid shooting, where we're doing a lot of mixed shooting, where we need smaller cameras and lighter gear because we're traveling a little bit more with them. We're also shooting a lot of video now, and so for me, that combination of hybrid shooting, the Sony A7R III, gives me that hybrid shooting without sacrificing image quality and features. The A7R II had a lot of that too, but the controls were just a little bit weak, and it had some limitations and was slower, and the autofocus system wasn't as good. Yeah. And for me, I wasn't willing to give up those things to get a hybrid camera at that point. But now that we have a camera that has all of that, I think it's finally time. And if you're more a hybrid shooter, but you still want that pro-end quality, this is a professional camera that you can take with you to any of those shoots and still maintain the excellent quality and autofocus performance and things like that from a camera like this. So yeah, any other thoughts on that? Yeah,
I mean, I do have to say, okay, I don't typically shoot Nikon. The Nikon D850, it blew my mind. I put it up next to the Sony A7R III and the 5D Mark IV, and the quality, oh my gosh, the detail is just impeccable on this camera. Seriously, if you are a Nikon shooter and you are looking into buying this camera, do it. It is worth the money. It is just unbelievable.
I mean, definitely sound off in the comments. Let me know what cameras you like. What do you think that we should buy? So yeah, let us know what you think on that one. Thanks for watching. I appreciate you guys watching this video. Again, hit like and subscribe. Stay tuned. We got a lot more to come. Should be fun.
Yeah.